Hello, my name is Michael Driscoll, and welcome to another episode of Python 101. This time I'll be teaching you about conditional statements in Python. So, developers have different decisions that they have to make all the time. How do you approach a problem that could have like branching decisions? Do you use technology X, technology Y? Which programming language can you use to solve this? Your code will sometimes have to make a decision. So in this tutorial, you'll learn about comparison operators, creating a conditional statement using the if statement in Python, branching conditional statements, nesting conditionals, logical operators, and special operators. Let's get started. So here we have some pretty typical comparison operators. It's good to understand how these work before you actually get started writing a conditional expression. A conditional operator is will let you ask if something equals something else, or if they're greater or less than. So here you have greater, less than, equal to. Note that it's a double equal sign. Not equal to, use an exclamation point in equal to make not equal to. Then greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. When you do comparison operators, it'll either return true or false. So let's go ahead and look at some examples of how this might work. So here we have some conditions. We have a equals 2, b equals 3, and then we test does a equal b. If you run this code, you can obviously see that 2 and 3 are not equal, so it returns false. Is a greater than b? Well, a is 2, b is 3. So if we run this time, we should get, let's go back. Sorry about that. A is not greater than b, but it is less than b. So that's true. Is a greater than or equal to b? That's going to be false because a is still 2 and b is still 3. However, a should be less than or equal to b. So let's go back and run that one. That's true. And of course, a is not equal to b, so this should return true if we run it, and it does. So that kind of gives you an idea of how you could use those conditional operators. Let's go ahead and create an actual conditional statement. So conditional statements let you code and branch down 2 or more different paths. Other programming languages have the idea of using a switch statement. Python currently does not have that as of 3.8, but you do have a nice robust if conditional statement. So let's say you go to a webmail account on a new computer and you need to log in. The code on the page will check to see if your email box is even there, and if it's there, it'll prompt you to log in if you're not already logged in. This is kind of a conditional statement that will get run. It's probably a lot more complex than what I'm describing here, but it will ask you, are you logged in or not? If you're not logged in, it'll prompt you to log in. And then there'll be another conditional statement after you enter your username and password that says, did he enter the right credentials? If you didn't, it will say, invalid credentials, invalid username and password, something like that, and you'll have to try again, and so on. Then once it's actually loaded, other conditional statements in your code will say, have you read this email or not? If you have, it'll mark it as read. If it's not, it'll mark it as unread. So you can see that there's lots of conditional statements running in the background that you don't even think about. For the purposes of this example, let's create a pretend authentication example. So we set the variable authenticated equal to true, and then we write if, which is our conditional statement keyword in Python, if authenticated, print out this message. So if we run it, you can see that it works because if authenticated actually equals true. So if you write a conditional statement using Python's if keyword, the conditional statement takes this form. If, some kind of expression, and then you'll do something in it. So if we go back here, the conditional statement or the expression is authenticated. Does it evaluate to true? In this case it does, so it works. Let's create a branching conditional statement. That means that you'll have 2 different options that will happen. So for this hypothetical situation, you might want to know if they're authenticated to log in. If they're not, you want something else to happen. So this time we set authenticated to false, and then we'll print out a different message to the user if they run it. So here it tells you to log in. So let's pretend that they're logged in now. We can test again. Now it says that you're logged in. It kind of gives you a general idea of how that might work. We just talked about this. Please log in. If you create a new scenario, let's create a conditional statement that will check your age and let you purchase different items depending on that. So, let's set age to 10. If your age is less than 10, you can buy candy. If your age is less than 21, you can buy tobacco and candy, which I don't recommend actually doing, but it's kind of an example. And then, of course, if you're greater than or equal to 21, then you can buy pretty much anything in the United States of America. So let's run this. Right now we have age set to 10, so the first if statement executes, determines that age is less than 18, so it prints this message. Let's try changing this to 18 and see what happens. So here we say, we ask if it's less than 18. It's not, so we drop to the second if statement, the elif. So if, else if, else if. In this case, age is less than 21, so now we can purchase other items. Let's say we make it 34. So now you can purchase anything that you want to. You can just kind of play with these numbers and see how it works. So conditional statements can be nested, and by nested I mean you can have a conditional statement within another conditional statement. Let's look at a silly example. So here we set the age to be 21 and the car be a Ford. If your age is greater than or equal to 21, then we check to see what your car is. If your car is equal to Honda, if your car is in a list of this list, we print out a silly thing: you can buy foreign cars. Also, if your car is in this list, you can buy American. And if your age is not greater than or equal to 21, then you just print that you're too young. If we run this code, it says that you buy American because we have this here. Now, this code won't do anything if you put just a fake name for a car model in here. It prints nothing because kudzu isn't found in either of these two lists. But if we change it to Honda, we can see that it says that you buy foreign cars. If we change this to 19, you'll get you are too young. So it completely skips this nested if entirely if your age is not greater than or equal to 21. And then, of course, if you mess up and you don't put in a valid car model, or at least a model that's in one of these two lists, you'll get nothing printed out, which is kind of bad code, really. Let's go else, and we'll say print, you buy something else, some other type of car. So now we can go back and go ahead and put our kudzu example back in. And we need to change this back to 21. And now we have this else statement, which actually I think we're going to learn about next here in a minute. Oh yes, but before we get there, if you nest a lot of conditionals, which you can nest, theoretically any number of times, but the more nesting you do, the more complicated your code is going to be. So, if I had 10 levels of if statements in here, this code is going to start leaking off to the right, off screen. It's going to be really hard to figure out how do you get to that deeply nested if statement. Usually that's not recommended if you've been coding very long. So you can use logical operators to help flatten that list out a little bit. So a logical operator in Python is and, or, and not. And will logically put two expressions together, and if both conditions are true, then that statement will execute. Or either of the two operands are true. And not is the operand is false. It's kind of confusing unless you played with it a little bit. Let's go ahead and look at some examples. So here we're combining some statements. So if the age is greater than or equal to 21 and the car is in this list, then you print that out. Else if age is still greater than a 21 and the car is in a different list. If you run this, you'll still jump into the second if statement here and get the you buy American. But you see there's no nested if statements here anymore, which is kind of nice. So when you use and, both expressions must evaluate to true. So it must be both greater than or equal to 21, and the car, it has to be in the list of Japanese or American or what have you. Let's see what happens if we change the code. So instead of using the AND, we use an OR statement here. So let's say if age is greater than or equal to 21, or the car is in Honda or Toyota. If we run this, it prints out you buy foreign cars when clearly we bought a Ford. The reason it did this is that when you use OR, Python uses a short circuit technology or logical statement. And as soon as it sees that the age is greater than or equal to 21, it immediately executes the code. It doesn't even look at this part of the code. It just sees, oh, this is true, and so it goes ahead and prints this out. So be a little bit careful when you use OR so that you know exactly what you're doing, because you may get unexpected results. Let's go ahead and look at how to use NOT. One easy way to use it is to say my list equals some list, and then ask is 5 not in this list. That's true. Let's change it to 3. Whoops, 3 is not in this list. Well, that's of course false because 3 is in the list. This is probably one of the more logically and more straightforward ways to use NOT, and it's kind of the way I would recommend using it to test membership. So what we're doing here is we're testing if the first value is in the list or a dictionary or a set, that kind of thing. When you're testing if something is in something else, that's testing membership, and it works really well with the NOT operator. Oops. So in that case, you're checking if an integer is not in a list. Let's go ahead and look at an authentication example to demonstrate how you might use the NOT statement though. So here we have some different IDs. Usually when you're logging in, your ID is probably your email address. In this case, you might, and a lot of the times underneath the covers, you'll also have a database entry or like a unique database ID as well. So here we're going to say we have an ID list. My ID happens to be this. And then we check to see if my ID is not in the IDs. So my ID is not in them. You're not authorized. So when I run this, obviously I'm not authorized. But if I change my code so that my ID is 1, 2, 3, 4, that does not get printed anymore. So that's another good way to use the NOT operator. Here we have a set of known IDs. I just kind of explained that. Now we're going to combine logical operators in a conditional statement. So here we're going to take hair and age, and we're going to test if the age is greater than or 21 and your hair is brown or blue, then you are old enough, basically. This is a really silly example. It just kind of shows you how you can chain together things using these operators. So here, we check and we see that the hair is brown or blue, and so it prints out that message. We've got one more topic to cover, special operators. So the special operators are is not, in, and not in. We kind of got a preview of not, in, and in already. In is basically checking if a value is in a sequence. Not in, the value is not in the sequence. Is will only evaluate to true if the operands are identical. And in other words, they have the same ID. Is not is, of course, the operands are not identical. We already looked at kind of in and not in, but we'll go ahead and look at some more examples. So here you have valid characters, Y and N. So for like yes and no that you might see in a terminal type thing if you use Linux a lot. Then we type the character X. If character is in valid characters, print the character out. So here, X is not in, Y or N, so that didn't work. Let's try changing it to Y. Y is a valid character. So you can kind of see how you might use the in keyword here. If you have any questions about how all of this might work, and you can feel free to put them in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. I look forward to hearing from you.